The valley was quiet that evening. The sun was low and painted the sky in red and gold. Tomas walked slowly along the riverbank with a bucket in his hand. He had planned to fill it with water for his small cabin, but something unusual caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a fallen log lying near the tall grass, but as he stepped closer, he saw movement. It was not a log. It was someone lying there, struggling to rise. Tomas hurried forward, his boots sinking in the soft soil near the river. As he approached, he stopped for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. The figure was not like any person he had seen before. The skin was pale like the moon, and the hair shone faintly under the last light of the day. The eyes, half open, were bright and strange, reflecting the river as though they held light of their own. The stranger was a girl, young, and clearly hurt. Her clothes were torn and darkened with marks of struggle. She tried to move but fell back against the ground, breathing heavily. Tomas knelt beside her. "You are hurt," he said softly, though he knew she would not understand. She stared at him with wide, tired eyes, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came that he could recognize. Instead, she lifted a trembling hand and pointed at her side. There was a wound hidden beneath her strange clothing, a deep cut that needed care. Tomas looked around. The land was quiet. No rider, no traveler, no sign of anyone else. Whoever she was alone here. He thought of leaving her, for danger often followed the unknown, but his heart did not allow it. He had lived a hard life, but he was not without compassion. He pulled out the small leather pouch he carried and poured a little water into his hand. He held it near her lips. At first she hesitated, her eyes studying him as if weighing his intent, but then she leaned forward weakly and drank. A small sigh left her, and for the first time she seemed less tense. "You need rest," Tomas said again, knowing the words were lost to her but speaking them anyway. The girl tried to stand, but her legs failed. She fell against him, light in weight but heavy with weakness. Tomas steadied her carefully. His mind was torn between fear and duty. If he brought her to his cabin, he would invite unknown risk. If he left her here, she would not survive the night. His eyes turned toward the edge of the field where his last horse stood tied to a post. The brown mare had been his companion through many seasons. It was the only horse left to him after sickness had taken the others. Without the mare, he could not plow his small field with ease, nor carry heavy loads from the town. Losing her would mean hardship. Yet Tomas looked back at the girl. She was not human, yet she was not an enemy to him in this moment. She was simply wounded and in need. He thought of how many times he had been alone, wishing for someone to lend a hand. Slowly, he helped her rise. She leaned on him, her steps small and unsteady. Together they reached the post where the mare stood. The horse snorted and shifted but did not resist. Tomas lifted the girl onto the saddle with great effort, steadying her with his strong arms. She clung to the reins weakly, her head lowering with exhaustion. "There," Tomas whispered. "She will carry you better than I can." He walked beside the horse, guiding it toward his cabin. The girl did not speak, but her bright eyes followed him with care. Every now and then she glanced at the fields and the sky, as though searching for something far away. The road was short but felt long in silence. Tomas wondered where she had come from. Her clothing was not from any nearby town. Her wound looked as though it had come from metal or fire, not from tools he knew. He felt the weight of mystery pressing on him, but he did not ask questions. For now, the only answer he sought was her survival. When they reached his cabin, Tomas tied the horse and lifted the girl down once more. She staggered, and he quickly put an arm around her to keep her steady. Inside the cabin, he laid her gently upon a small cot near the fire. The place was humble, built from stone and wood, but it was safe and warm. Tomas set to work. He washed her wound with water, using clean cloth to press against it. She winced but did not push him away. She watched him with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. There was trust growing between them, though not a single word was shared. When the wound was wrapped as best as Tomas could manage, he gave her a small piece of bread and another sip of water. She accepted both with quiet gratitude. Her hands trembled as she held the food, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. Tomas sat across from her, watching the flames rise and fall. His thoughts wandered. He had given his last horse to her, and now he wondered if he would ever see it again. Yet as he looked at the pale girl resting on his cot, he felt no regret. Something deep inside told him that this act, small though it seemed, would matter in ways he could not yet see. Outside, the valley grew dark. The stars began to shine, and the sound of the river flowed gently through the night air. Tomas leaned back in his chair, still watching the girl. She had already fallen into a deep sleep, her face calm at last. The fire burned low in the cabin, throwing soft light across the wooden walls. Tomas sat near the door with his arms folded, his eyes half closed yet always alert. The pale girl slept on the cot, her breath slow but steady. Every now and then she shifted, her face tightening in pain, but she did not cry out. Tomas watched her carefully, wondering what kind of world she came from. Morning arrived quietly. The valley outside was covered in a thin mist, and the river sang with gentle sound. Tomas stood and stretched his stiff limbs. He stepped outside to fetch water, but when he returned, the girl was already awake. She sat upright on the cot, her strange eyes following every move he made. Tomas spoke in his calm voice. "You are safe here. I will not harm you." He knew she could not understand, but he said the words anyway, for they felt important. The girl tilted her head slightly, as though she was trying to catch meaning in his tone. Then, slowly, she placed her hand over her chest and gave a small nod. The gesture was not a word, but it was enough. She understood something, perhaps not the language, but the intent behind it. Tomas brought a wooden bowl filled with warm water and placed it near her. He handed her a cloth so she could wash her face. She accepted it carefully, her thin fingers moving with grace even though she was weak. When she touched the water, she paused as if the warmth surprised her. She pressed the wet cloth to her skin and sighed softly. Tomas found himself watching her with quiet wonder. There was something delicate about her, yet also something unshakable, as if she carried a strength not seen at first glance. He thought of the wound at her side and how she had endured the long night without complaint. After washing, she tried to stand. Her legs trembled, and she swayed dangerously. Tomas rushed forward, holding her steady. For a moment she leaned against him, her hand gripping his sleeve. Her eyes met his, full of silent determination. "She wanted to walk, you must rest," Tomas said firmly, guiding her back to the cot. "You are not ready." She shook her head lightly, her pale hair brushing against her face. Then she pointed to the window, where the mist outside was beginning to lift. She looked at him as if to say she could not stay here forever. Tomas frowned. He had given her his last horse, his only means of true work and travel, yet he did not regret it. What he feared was that her journey was not over, and wherever she was meant to go might bring trouble. Still, he could not deny her spirit. He walked to a shelf and brought her a piece of dried fruit and a slice of bread. She accepted it, eating slowly. She seemed to study every part of the food, as though it was strange to her, yet she did not refuse it. Hunger won over hesitation. As she ate, Tomas tried to speak again. He pointed to himself and said clearly, "Tomas." He touched his chest when he spoke, repeating the name twice. The girl tilted her head and studied him. After a pause, she placed her hand over her chest and spoke a sound, a soft word that carried strange tones. It was not like any human name, but Tomas listened closely. She repeated it once more, and though he could not shape the word perfectly, He nodded. "Your name," he said, pointing at her, then repeated the sound she had made, though his tongue stumbled over it. Her lips curved slightly, almost like a faint smile. For the first time, she seemed lighter, less guarded. Trust was beginning to form between them, built not on language but on effort and kindness. The day passed slowly. Tomas worked outside for a short time, chopping wood and fetching water, but he returned often to check on her. Each time, she sat near the fire, watching the flames with quiet eyes. She seemed curious about his cabin, touching the wooden walls and the rough table, as though she had never seen such simple things before. In the afternoon, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. A storm rolled across the valley, and rain began to fall. Tomas lit another fire to keep the cabin warm. The girl sat near it, her pale skin glowing in the flickering light. She lifted her hand toward the flames, almost in wonder, as if fire itself was rare to her people. During the storm, a loud crack of thunder shook the cabin. The girl flinched, her body tense, her eyes sharp and alert as if expecting danger. Tomas placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "It is only thunder. It will pass." His calm voice soothed her. Slowly, she relaxed, though her gaze still darted toward the window whenever lightning flashed. That night, Tomas offered her a blanket. She accepted it, wrapping herself carefully. Before she lay down, she pointed once more toward the sky beyond the roof. Her eyes filled with longing, as if she was waiting for someone or something to arrive. Then she touched the wound at her side and lowered her gaze. Tomas understood in part. She had not come here by choice. She was far from her people. And she was waiting. He sat back in his chair, staring into the fire. His mind was heavy with questions. Who were her people? Why had she been alone and wounded in the valley? Were there others like her searching for her now? The girl looked at him once more, her eyes calm now. She did not speak, but she gave a small nod of her head, as if to thank him again. Then she closed her eyes and drifted into sleep. Tomas remained awake long after. He could not explain why he had given his last horse, why he had taken her in, or why he felt this deep sense of responsibility for her. All he knew was that something had changed. The valley no longer felt like the quiet, empty place it had been. It was alive with mystery, and he was part of it. The storm passed by the next morning, leaving the land wet and shining. The river ran faster than before, carrying leaves and branches down its flow. Tomas stepped outside to gather wood, his boots sinking into the damp soil. He paused for a moment, breathing the clean air. The valley smelled of rain and earth. Inside the cabin, the girl sat quietly near the fire. She had managed to rise from the cot and now stood at the small window, her pale hand resting on the wooden frame. Her eyes searched the sky as though expecting something to appear from beyond the clouds. When Tomas returned with wood, she turned to look at him, then at the sky again. The meaning was clear. She was waiting. Tomas placed the wood by the hearth and spoke gently. "No one is here yet." He knew she did not understand the words, but he said them anyway. His voice carried comfort, even if meaning was lost. The girl returned to the cot. She held herself tall despite her weakness, her movements graceful, almost practiced. Tomas noticed how she studied everything he did. When he sharpened his knife, she watched. When he patched a crack in the wall, her eyes followed. It was as if she was learning about his world piece by piece. As the day passed, Tomas kept busy with his tasks. He repaired the fence around the small garden, fetched water, and checked on the mare that now rested in the shed. The horse neighed softly when he entered, but Tomas only stroked her neck and whispered kind words. He thought of the girl again. His last horse was now hers, whether she knew it or not. By evening, the girl's strength seemed to grow a little. She walked around the cabin slowly, touching the wooden beams, the rough table, and even the tools lined against the wall. She seemed curious, as though these simple human objects were treasures from another world. At supper, Tomas placed bread and boiled roots on the table. He motioned for her to sit. She hesitated at first but then joined him. She ate carefully, each bite small, but her eyes showed relief. Hunger had been heavy on her, though she had tried to hide it. After the meal, silence filled the cabin. The fire crackled, and outside the wind stirred the wet trees. Tomas leaned back in his chair, watching her. She sat across from him, her hands folded neatly, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You are far from home," he said quietly. His words were not for her to understand, but for himself. "I do not know who you are, but I know you are not meant to be alone." The girl tilted her head, her eyes fixed on him. She seemed to sense the weight of his voice even if she did not grasp the meaning. Slowly, she raised her hand and touched her chest again, speaking her name softly. The strange sound filled the air. Tomas repeated it, stumbling over the tones, but trying all the same. She nodded once, her face softening. Then she pointed to him and said, "Tomas." Her voice was light but steady. It was the first time she had spoken his name. The sound surprised him. It was broken in tone, but clear enough. He felt warmth spread through his chest. Trust was growing between them, like a bridge slowly built from fragile wood. As night fell, Tomas stoked the fire once more. He noticed her gaze return to the window. The stars were bright now, scattered across the sky like 1,000 watchful eyes. She stepped closer to the window, her face lit by starlight. Tomas joined her side. Together they looked out at the quiet valley. The night was calm, yet the air carried something unspoken, a tension neither could name. The girl lifted her hand and pointed toward the heavens. Then she pressed her hand to her wound. Her meaning was clear. She was waiting for someone, perhaps her own kind, to come. Tomas felt uneasy. He wondered what would happen if her people truly arrived. Would they see him as a friend because he had helped her, or as an intruder who had touched what was not his? The thought pressed heavily on him. Yet he knew he could not undo his choice. He had helped her because it was right. The hours passed slowly. Tomas remained awake, sitting in his chair by the fire. The girl rested on the cot, but she did not fall into deep sleep. Every so often she opened her eyes and looked toward the sky, as if listening for sounds beyond human hearing. At one point, Tomas stepped outside. The night was clear, the air cool on his skin. He gazed at the stars, and for a moment he imagined great ships hidden among them, silent watchers beyond human sight. He shook the thought from his mind, yet it lingered. Something told him the valley was no longer just his home. It was part of a greater story now. When he returned inside, the girl met his eyes. She raised her hand and gave a small nod, as if thanking him again. Then she closed her eyes once more, her body finally surrendering to sleep. Tomas sat in the silence of the cabin. The fire crackled softly. The world outside was still. Yet his heart knew change was near. The girl was waiting, and whatever she waited for would not be long in coming. The night stretched on longer than Tomas wished. The fire sank low, and only red embers glowed faintly in the hearth. Outside, the valley was silent. The girl slept lightly, her breathing soft, but even in her sleep her fingers twitched as though she was dreaming of something far away. Tomas did not sleep at all. He sat near the door with his arms resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the window. When the first light of dawn began to creep across the land, Tomas felt a strange stillness. The mist clung to the river and the trees, and the air was colder than usual. It was not the ordinary quiet of morning. It was heavier, as though the valley itself held its breath. The girl stirred before the sun rose fully. She pushed herself up with effort, her pale eyes fixed on the horizon. Tomas noticed how tense she became, her back straight, her gaze unblinking. She was not simply watching the morning. She was waiting for something. Then Tomas felt it. The ground beneath his boots gave the slightest tremor, too soft to be an earthquake but enough to make the wooden boards creak. His heart quickened. He stood and stepped outside, the cold air biting at his face. There, across the field, 3 figures stood at the edge of the mist. At first, Tomas thought the morning light was playing tricks on his eyes, but then he saw them clearly. They were tall and slender, their forms graceful yet strong. Their skin was pale like the girl's, their eyes glowing faintly silver in the early light. Their clothing was not like hers, for theirs seemed whole and shining, lined with patterns that shimmered when touched by the sun. They did not move or speak. They only stood, watching him in silence. Tomas felt a chill run down his spine. These were her people. Her sisters, perhaps, though he did not know their bond for certain. He swallowed hard and glanced back at the cabin. The girl had risen and now stood in the doorway, her hand clutching the frame for support. When she saw them, her eyes widened, and a faint sound escaped her lips. She stepped outside slowly, her wound still slowing her movement. Her gaze never left the 3 figures. Then she lifted her hand and pointed at Tomas. She spoke in her own tongue for the first time in his hearing, her voice soft but filled with meaning. The words were strange, carrying tones he could not place, yet they carried weight. The 3 figures shifted slightly. One of them stepped forward, her silver eyes narrowing as they studied Tomas. She placed her hand gently on the wounded girl's shoulder, as if to claim her, and then turned her gaze back to him. Tomas stood still, his hands at his sides. He knew he was out of place here. These beings could easily see him as a threat. He had taken one of their own into his home. Yet he had also saved her. He hoped they would see that too. The girl spoke again, this time louder, pointing once more at Tomas. Her voice carried urgency, and though Tomas did not understand the words, he knew she was explaining what had happened. She was telling them about the horse, about the shelter, about the care he had given her. The tallest of the 3 sisters tilted her head. She moved with silent grace as she stepped closer to Tomas. He did not back away, though his heart pounded in his chest. Her eyes were piercing, as though they could see into his thoughts. She circled him once, her steps making no sound on the grass. Then she stopped in front of him, her face unreadable. The second sister moved to the horse tied near the shed. She stroked the mare's mane with long, careful fingers. The animal stood still, calm under her touch. She examined the saddle, the reins, and then looked toward Tomas with a curious expression. The third sister remained near the wounded girl, supporting her gently. She whispered something soft in her ear, and the girl answered with a weak smile. The silence was heavy, but Tomas did not break it. He felt that words would mean little here. Instead, he bowed his head slightly, not in surrender but in respect. He had done all he could. Their judgment would come now. The tallest sister studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped back. She spoke in their strange tongue to the others. Her voice was calm, but her tone carried power. The other 2 nodded. The wounded girl raised her hand, pointing once more at Tomas. She repeated a single word several times. Her sisters listened, and though Tomas could not understand, he felt the weight of her insistence. She wanted them to know him, to remember him. At last, the tallest sister turned back to him. She gave a slow, measured nod. It was not a smile, nor was it hostility. It was something else. Recognition. Tomas let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The 3 sisters gathered close to the girl. With great care, they lifted her between them. She leaned against them with relief, though she kept her eyes on Tomas the entire time. The faint light of sunrise touched her face, painting it in gold. Tomas felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. She was leaving, and with her, the mystery that had entered his quiet life. Yet he knew this was right. She belonged with her own people. The sisters did not speak to him, but their silence was not cruel. It was purposeful, as though words were unnecessary. They had seen what they needed to see. They had measured him, and they had chosen not to harm him. The girl, now held by her sisters, raised her hand one final time. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes were steady. She gave him the same nod she had given in the cabin, a gesture of trust and thanks. Then, in silence, the sisters turned and began to walk across the field. Their steps were soundless, their forms almost blending with the mist as the rising sun grew brighter. The mare followed without resistance, guided by them as though she belonged to them now. Tomas remained where he stood, watching until they vanished into the golden horizon. The valley was quiet again, but Tomas knew it would never feel the same. The dawn had brought not just her sisters but a truth he could not deny. The world was larger than he had ever imagined, and he had touched it for a brief, unforgettable moment. He turned back to his cabin, the fire still glowing faintly inside. His life would continue, but his heart carried the weight of that morning. Humanity had been tested in silence, and through his small act of kindness, he felt they had been seen. Tomas spent the morning walking through the valley in silence. The mist had lifted, and the sun now warmed the damp ground. Birds sang from the trees, and the river flowed as it always had, but the world no longer felt familiar. The sight of the three sisters was burned into his memory. Their pale faces, their silver eyes, the way they had looked at him without words. He had lived a simple life for years, yet now he knew he had stepped into something far greater. He returned to the cabin and sat by the cold hearth. The fire had died during the dawn, leaving only ash. Tomas ran a hand through his rough hair and thought about the girl. He wondered what her sisters would do for her wound, and if she would heal quickly among them. He also wondered what they would decide about him. The day passed slowly. Tomas tried to work, repairing the fence and clearing weeds from the garden, but his thoughts kept drifting. Every sound from the hills made him pause, expecting to see the silver-eyed sisters return. Each time the wind shifted, his heart raced as if it carried whispers of their voices. As the sun lowered again, his unease grew. He felt it in his chest, the sense that he was not alone. He gathered wood and lit a fire in the hearth. The flames gave light, but they did little to calm him. He sat in his chair, waiting. When night finally came, the valley grew silent. Too silent. Not even the owls called from the trees. Tomas knew then. They were near. The door of his cabin creaked without being touched. Tomas stood quickly, his hand on the handle of his knife, though he knew a blade would be useless against them. The air inside the cabin shifted, colder now. Then he saw them. The three sisters stood just beyond the doorway, framed by moonlight. Their faces were calm, unreadable, their silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The wounded girl was not with them. Tomas guessed she rested somewhere safe, away from danger. They entered without sound, their movements flowing like water. Tomas stood firm, though his chest tightened. He bowed his head slightly in respect, unsure what else to do. The tallest sister stepped forward. She carried in her hand a small, glowing object, a shard of crystal that pulsed with soft light. She placed it on the table. It glowed brighter for a moment, filling the cabin with pale silver light. Tomas stared at it, confused. The sister looked at him, then touched her chest and spoke words in her own language. He did not understand, but her tone was steady and deliberate. She pointed to the crystal, then to him. The second sister stepped closer. She held his arm firmly, though not cruelly. She studied the rough skin of his hand, the scars from years of work. Her expression was calm but searching. She let go after a moment, then nodded to the tallest. The third sister, quieter than the others, walked to the hearth. She crouched near the fire, watching the flames. Her pale face reflected the orange glow, and for the first time Tomas thought he saw something like wonder in her eyes. She whispered to her sisters, and they all turned their gaze back to him. The crystal pulsed again. Suddenly, Tomas felt something strange. A warmth entered his mind, not painful but overwhelming. Images flickered across his thoughts, images not his own. He saw stars scattered across black space, great vessels that glided like shadows through the void, and landscapes of worlds he could not name. He gasped and staggered back, but the sisters did not move. The vision ended as quickly as it had begun. His breath came heavy, his heart pounding. "What are you doing to me?" he whispered, though he knew they would not answer in his tongue. The tallest sister placed a hand over the crystal again. She spoke softly to the others, then looked at Tomas with steady eyes. Though he did not know the words, he understood something. They were measuring him, weighing his spirit, deciding if he was worthy. Tomas lowered his gaze. He thought of the choice he had made when he gave up his horse, the last piece of strength he owned. He thought of the long nights he had sat awake to guard a stranger. He had not done it for reward. He had done it because it was right. Slowly, he stepped forward. He placed his hand on the glowing crystal. The light flared, brighter than before. For a moment, he felt again the rush of stars, but this time he did not resist. He let it wash through him, showing him the vastness of their world. He felt small, yet also part of something greater. The sisters watched closely. When the light dimmed, Tomas removed his hand. His chest rose and fell with deep breaths. He did not know what they had seen inside him, but he knew he had not hidden anything. He had given them his truth. The sisters exchanged silent glances. Finally, the tallest one stepped forward. She bowed her head slightly, the same way he had bowed to them at dawn. It was not deep, but it was enough. A gesture of respect returned. Tomas felt relief sweep through him. He did not know if he had passed their test, but he knew he was not seen as an enemy. Without a word, the sisters lifted the crystal and carried it with them. They turned toward the door. The tallest paused for a brief moment, looking back at him with those silver eyes. Then they stepped outside, their forms vanishing into the night as though swallowed by the mist. Tomas stood alone once more in the cabin, the fire flickering beside him. His hands still tingled from the touch of the crystal. His mind held images of stars he could never forget. He sat down slowly in his chair. His body felt heavy, but his spirit was strangely light. They had come not just to reclaim their sister, but to judge him, to measure what humanity was worth. The night after the sisters departed was the longest Tomas had ever lived. He did not sleep. He sat by the fire until the last piece of wood was gone and only glowing embers remained. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, waiting, though he did not know if they would return. When morning finally came, the valley looked calm, as if nothing had happened. Birds sang, the river flowed, and sunlight spilled across the grass. Yet Tomas knew that the world had changed. He had seen stars through their crystal, and he had felt the weight of their judgment. Life could never return to what it had been. He walked outside and tended to his chores. He carried water, chopped wood, and gathered herbs from the garden, but his thoughts never left the sisters. He wondered where they had taken their wounded kin. He hoped she was healing. He also wondered if they would come back to him. The day passed, slow as ever. By evening, Tomas felt a heavy tiredness. He cooked a small meal of bread and stew, though his hunger was weak. After eating, he sat on the wooden step of his cabin, watching the horizon. The sky was painted with orange and gold, and the sun sank behind the far hills. Then he heard it. A faint hum, low but steady, drifted across the valley. His chest tightened. He knew it was them. He stood quickly, his eyes scanning the fading light. From the northern ridge, figures appeared. Not 3 this time, but 4. The wounded girl walked among her sisters, her steps careful but strong. Tomas felt relief fill him. She had healed enough to walk. They moved in silence, as they always did, yet their presence filled the valley with power. When they reached the cabin, they stopped in front of him. The air grew still, as if the earth itself waited. The girl he had once carried looked at him with silver eyes. They were softer now, no longer clouded with pain. She touched her chest, then pointed at him. Tomas understood she remembered. The tallest sister stepped forward again. In her hand, she held something new. Not a crystal this time, but a small object wrapped in thin silver cloth. She placed it on the ground before him. The fabric shimmered as if woven from moonlight. Tomas looked at it, then at her. "For me?" he asked, though he knew they could not understand his words. The sister nodded slowly. He bent down and lifted the gift with care. The cloth felt smooth and warm, though no fire touched it. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing what lay inside. It was a piece of stone, smooth and round, no larger than his palm. But it glowed faintly, with shifting colors that reminded him of the sky before sunrise. Blue, pink, gold. As he held it, the light seemed to respond, pulsing gently. Tomas stared in awe. He had never seen such a thing. The wounded girl stepped forward now. She touched the glowing stone in his hand and then touched his chest, over his heart. The meaning was clear. This was not just a gift. It was a bond. Tomas swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had no words that could match the weight of what they were giving him. So he bowed his head, deeper this time than ever before. His hand pressed the stone to his chest. The sisters exchanged glances. Then, for the first time, the quietest among them spoke in a voice like wind moving through leaves. The word was strange, foreign, but it carried meaning beyond sound. Tomas felt it settle in him. A name. Not his name, but a name they gave to him. Protector. He did not need to know their language to understand. The word burned inside him like fire, and he knew it would stay forever. The tallest sister raised her hand. The air shimmered above them, and for a moment Tomas thought the very sky might open. He saw shadows moving far above, shapes too vast to belong to birds. Ships, he realized. Silent and waiting. His heart pounded, but the sisters did not move toward the ships. Instead, they turned to him. The tallest gestured to the horizon where the sun had already sunk. She pointed at him again, then at the glowing stone he held. Tomas understood. He was not leaving with them. They were leaving something with him. A piece of their light. The sisters began to step back. The wounded girl lingered a little longer, her silver eyes meeting his. She gave a small nod, almost human in its simplicity, before following her kin. As they walked into the mist, their forms shimmered and faded. The hum grew louder for a moment, then vanished into silence. They were gone. Tomas stood alone once more, but now he was not empty. In his hand, the stone pulsed with living light. He felt its warmth spread through his arm, into his chest. It was not just a gift. It was trust. It was recognition. He returned to the cabin and placed the stone on the table. The glow filled the room, brighter than any fire. He sat beside it, staring at its colors. His rough hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what it meant. All his life, Tomas had lived quietly. He had lost much, but he had survived. He had not expected that one simple choice, giving away his last horse to save a stranger, would bring him here. Now, in the silence of his cabin, he realized the truth. He had been measured. He had been judged. And he had been chosen. The stone continued to glow, a steady heartbeat in the dark. Outside, the valley was calm again, but Tomas knew the world was no longer the same. Somewhere above, among the stars, the sisters watched. and in his small home, the gift of dawn burned softly, a reminder that humanity had been seen and remembered. The valley woke slowly the next morning. Sunlight spilled across the river and fields, touching every leaf with gold. Tomas rose early, as he always did, but this morning felt different. The glowing stone from the sisters rested on the table. Its soft light pulsed gently, as if alive, filling the cabin with warmth and calm. Tomas reached for it and held it in his hands. He felt its energy travel through him, a quiet hum that settled in his chest. It was not just a stone. It was a connection, a promise, and a reminder that his actions mattered beyond the valley, beyond the small life he had always known. He walked outside with the stone in his pocket. The mare was in the shed, calm and patient, and the wind carried the scent of earth and river. The valley seemed ordinary, yet Tomas now knew it was part of something larger. Somewhere beyond the sky, her sisters and their people had seen him. Humanity had been measured, and humanity had been remembered. The day passed slowly, as he tended to chores and worked in his small fields. But the light of the stone never left his thoughts. He looked at it often, turning it over in his hands, fascinated by the subtle colors that shifted like the sky at dawn. He felt a responsibility now, one he had never felt before. This was more than a gift. It was trust, and with it came purpose. Tomas thought of the girl he had helped. He wondered if she was healing, if her sisters had kept her safe, and if she would ever remember him. He did not feel sadness. He felt pride. For one brief moment, he had done what was right, and it had been witnessed. By midday, Tomas walked to the river. He knelt on the bank and watched the water flow. The stone, still in his pocket, pulsed faintly against his side. He imagined the girl walking with her sisters across strange lands, their silver eyes shining like moons in a dark sky. He imagined them telling her stories of him, of the kindness of humans. A sense of calm filled him. His heart no longer felt heavy with worry or fear. He understood now that small acts of courage and care mattered in ways unseen. The sisters had judged him, yes, but they had also left him with the knowledge that humanity could rise above its limits when guided by compassion. As evening approached, Tomas returned to the cabin. The fire was ready to be lit, but he paused to look at the hills beyond his fields. The sun touched them with golden light, and for the first time, he saw them not as distant barriers but as gateways to a world he had never known. He placed the stone carefully on a shelf near the window. Its soft glow filled the cabin with light even after the sun had set. He could not explain it, and he did not try. The sisters had left their message clear. Humanity, through him, had shown worth. That night, he sat in his chair, watching the stars. He thought of the girl and her sisters. Somewhere beyond the valley, beyond the mountains, they watched over their own. Somewhere beyond the sky, they remembered him, and through him, all of humanity. Tomas felt a strange pride and peace. He realized he had been part of something greater than himself. His small choices, his care for a wounded stranger, had echoed far beyond his simple life. He had been given a gift, yes, but the true gift was recognition, proof that humans could be trusted, could be brave, and could show kindness even in isolation. Days passed. Tomas continued his work, caring for his land and tending to the mare he had once given away but now understood was not lost. The stone's light remained constant, a quiet companion in the long hours of labor. He no longer worried about visitors or danger. He knew that beyond the stars, unseen eyes watched, and that knowledge gave him courage. In time, the valley seemed unchanged to anyone passing by. Yet Tomas felt differently. He carried a quiet strength and a deep sense of connection. Each time he looked at the stone, he remembered the girl's eyes, the silent judgment of her sisters, and the gift they had left behind. He understood that human actions could matter in ways no one could measure, that simple kindness could ripple far beyond what one could see. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tomas walked to the top of the ridge overlooking the river. The air was cool, and the wind carried a scent of earth and water. He knelt, placing his hand on the soil, and spoke softly, though no one could hear him. "I will remember," he said. He thought of the girl, her sisters, and the world beyond the stars. "I will always do what is right." He returned to the cabin and lit the fire. The stone's glow filled the room, casting a soft light on the walls and floor. Tomas sat in his chair, hands folded in his lap, and watched the flames. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely at peace. The valley was quiet, the stars were bright above, and humanity had been seen. Somewhere far beyond, the sisters and their people moved silently through the universe. They carried the memory of Tomas's choice with them. And in their own way, they shared it with others, a quiet acknowledgement that one human had acted with courage, kindness, and selflessness. Tomas leaned back, a small smile on his face. He understood now that life's meaning was measured not by wealth, or power, or land, but by choices. One act of compassion could reach farther than a lifetime of selfish deeds. He had given his last horse to a stranger, and in return, he had been given trust, recognition, and a connection to something far greater than himself. The stone pulsed gently once more, a heartbeat of light in the quiet cabin. Tomas closed his eyes and listened to the river, to the wind in the trees, to the world that was vast, mysterious, and full of life. Humanity had been remembered. Through him, it had been seen.